Hello, and welcome to Shy Talk, an Irish history podcast / semi-current affairs and finance podcast. This week's episode is following on from last week's Cowboy special about Sean Quinn. This is part 2, the Anglo Menace. This episode mostly covers Sean Quinn and Anglo-Irish Bank and a couple of the other banks between the years 2008 and until 2011. The crash times. And then part 3 will be covering all the legal cases, all the current affairs stuff you might have heard about in the news over the last year or so. And as we discussed last week, that'll be behind a paywall. Half as a marketing tool, but also we just finished recording it a few days ago and we got into some stuff on there that's probably for the best that certain people can't access it readily, I suppose. Has a lot to talk about various litigious folk and paramilitary organizations that it's probably for the best that it's behind a €5 paywall. So to get that, you can head over to, we set up a Patreon last week. We had a good few people sign up there already, which has been fantastic. Thank you all for this. They're probably not listening to this because they've already had access to this episode for a week now. But we've also managed to jerry-rig something onto Buy Me a Coffee. We've set it up so you can go over there and just pay a one-time $5 to get access to the bonus content feed. And anyone that's already donated to us on Buy Me a Coffee, anyone who's already sent us money, you should have received a membership email from Buy Me a Coffee over the last few days, which basically gives you access to the bonus content feed as well, because you're dead sound and you already gave us cash. So if you follow that email, there's a post there explaining what to do, but basically you can click on that Quinn extra on the Buy Me a Coffee homepage and it will give you access to the feed. So if you enjoyed this episode and you want to see what happens to Sean Quinn after all this shit hits all those fans, you can head over to Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee and get access to part 3 for the price of €5. And that episode will be released later on tonight, Wednesday the 2nd of June. So odds are if you're listening to this, it's already out. So that's it. Here is part 2, Sean Quinn and the Anglo Menace.
For adventure, listening closely to this tale. Brown envelopes on the table, you know how it goes. The old fable, that's for no one else to know. Taking in cash, hand on a fist, the real McCoy's gangster list. Stories of cowboys that dwell in the land, beg, steal, and borrow with salutes to the scam. The kind that pull the wool over your eyes, take your shirt off your back and call it surprise. Sullied names and cover-ups full of allies and allies. Deceivers, cheats, and don't forget the lies, lies, lies.
Here's a recap for last week's episode. Basically, Sean Quinn started off with nothing but a field of stone and £100 in his back pocket, and he turned that into a thriving business and then used massive tax breaks, cutthroat business practices and offshore tax avoidance to become a billionaire. He started funneling more and more of his investment portfolio into something called CFDs, Contract for Differences, on Anglo-Irish shares. His CFDs, they're basically just a bet that the shares in the bank will go up, and by 2007, he had shares covering 28% of the bank.
Yeah, so you get the broker to buy the share, and then if it makes money, you make money. And if it loses money, then you have to owe the broker a bunch of money.
Exactly, yeah. And he's covering 28% of a major bank, and the share price is going...
Without their knowledge.
I think
now they've got
just
their
found
knowledge,
out,
yeah.
yes. And after they found out and told him to stop, he went and got more. So the credit crunch starts in 2007. The bank's share price starts to plummet, which means that he owes his brokers a load of money, more money than he can pay them at the time. So he starts getting loans from the bank in order to pay off the margins for the CFDs. And the bank keeps giving him money in order to hide the fact that he owns 28% of the bank. And that's pretty much the story from last week.
Yeah, but you did have what was the figure you had at the end of last week, that it was like... he used to be worth 4.5 billion, and then by the end of that year it was like he owed Barclays 1.4.
Well, yeah, so he was in 2008 he was in Forbes magazine. His estimated worth was 4.7 billion. He was the wealthiest person in Ireland, the 164th wealthiest person on the planet. But underneath those figures, he owed Barclays banks and a load of bondholders 1.3 billion, and he was just about to start racking up a massive bill with Anglo. But that's how you get rich, Jason. You know, I'm worth 4.7 billion, but I owe the bank 5 billion.
Yeah, you got to lose a bunch of money to make money.
So here we go. So in early 2008, UBS, who are like an international investment bank, devalued investments in all Irish banks because they thought the property values are going to fall by about 30%. And then banks that were overly exposed to housing loans would be fucked. But in February 2008, Sean Fitzpatrick, who's the head of Anglo-Irish Bank, he gives a speech at the annual general meeting. He says the news from UBS is bogus. Everything's grand. Anglo just topped $1 billion profit for the first time at the end of the last year. It's sorted.
Is his tactic just like, what if it's all lies?
Yeah, it's actually don't worry about that. I mean, listen, just because we've been giving out loads of risky mortgages to people and the world financial sector is just starting now to wake up to the fact that it's all balanced on a house of cards. I know you're worried,
but how have you thought about this angle? What if nothing bad happens? What if none of those chickens come home to roost?
You could have been his speechwriter. Apparently that's what he went for. But so he's saying everything's grand at this AGM, but behind the scenes, his second in command, David Drum, these are like emails that get leaked years later, but at the same time, he's sending around emails, putting everyone on the bank at red alert, saying that they can't afford to take on any new loans over the next 2 months. He's like, there's no money, don't lend anything out to anybody.
No, the company's fine. Also, there will be no more free teas and coffees, no more complimentary water in the building, especially not hot water.
If you want to put on the heat, just bring a jumper from home instead, okay? We're turning off the radiators for the next month.
They were very progressive, actually. They were doing it about 12 years before COVID. They were work from home. We're just not going to have an office anymore. Let's just not bother with an office.
So PwC, they are checking on Ireland's second biggest insurance company, Quinn Insurance. And they're hired every year to like look over the books that they've done the year before and, you know, give them the stamp of approval or whatever. But now, compared to like the last time we were talking about the insurance companies, there's now a proper financial regulator for insurance. So you have to start following actual rules, and they're pretty stringent about how much money you have to set aside in order to cover future claims. So when PwC look at the books, they see that there's huge amounts of money leaving Quinn Insurance and going to other Quinn companies. There's 398 million that's essentially just being given from Quinn Group to one of the other companies. And then there's another like 300 million in sales of buildings from one company to another. But no one's valued the buildings. So he's essentially just selling his own buildings to himself for prices that he's made up.
Ooh, okay. This makes sense though. I've seen this happen now a lot with football clubs.
Yeah.
Where they're like, you get to such a level where you're like, right, we need to balance the books. So why don't we sell you a player that's worth 20 million for 70? And then you next year get this guy. We'll just change it back up, and it happens so obvious, and they never talk about it.
Well, keep that in mind for the next few bits of this story. So essentially, he's just moving money out of his insurance company to put into his other businesses, but he's doing it to fund the CFDs.
Yeah.
So he's taking money out of his insurance company to gamble / pay off the debts he already owes for his bets on the bank.
Like, I do have to respect that. There's a certain beauty to taking money out of your insurance company to just gamble on nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he appreciated the poetry of what he was doing. I'm sure he just took a moment to stop and be like, God, it's funny, isn't it?
the 2000s.
What a world.
What a time to be alive.
Sorry, Quinn, did you say something? Never mind. Keep rooting the money out.
Walking around just whispering to himself, fucking ridiculous. Unbelievable.
So at this stage, so PwC was looking into the money. The financial regulator, so the head of the financial regulator body in the country was Patrick Neary.
Was he about to see some financial irregulations?
He's about to see nothing at all by the sounds of it. So he's aware of Quinn's CFD position with Anglo, and he's aware of the money coming out of the insurance stuff. Like he's been informed of all these things, but he doesn't want to punish Quinn too much, because he figures if people find out that one of the biggest employers in the country, is taking money out of the second biggest insurance company in the country to prop up share prices in the third biggest bank in the country, that's not good news for anybody. So as the regulator for these things, he's like, there's too much going on here. Let's just say nothing and see how it plays out.
I understand that line of thinking.
Yeah, it's like this. If it was one problem, I could deal with that. This is several problems, and I'm just going to not touch it and see what happens.
There's some sand over there. It looks very enticing from my head.
Yeah, so what happens at this time, like PwC basically just put the review of the finances off for a while. They say, we'll look back at this in a couple of months. So David Drum, chief executive of Anglo, his main priority in early 2008 is figuring out what to do with Quinn's CFDs. They want to get rid of his 28% holding in the bank. They bring in Morgan Stanley to try and help them. They're trying to sell off some of the shares to companies in the Middle East, but they can't sell any of them. Then in March, the share price of US investment bank Bear Stearns plummets. And they had a huge exposure to the subprime mortgage crisis, and the investors lost faith and just bailed out of it. Those we learned from that Michael Lewis film/book, The Big Short. When you hear like subprime, just think shit. So when they're talking about subprime mortgages, they just mean fucking dog shit mortgages. Mortgages they shouldn't have been given to people. So Bear Stearns is kind of the first big investment bank to go down, and that spooks everyone. So over the weekend of the 15th, 16th of March 2008, Morgan Stanley step in and buy Bear Stearns for 1% of what it had been worth the previous year. So now there's a precedent set as to what can happen to a bank. So I guess before this, it was all speculation as to what could happen. But here you have like a major investment firm being bought for 1% by the same consultancy firm that's helping Anglo with their books. So people are looking at them being like, well, fuck, what are they doing over there?
Okay.
Doesn't look good.
Yeah.
So on March 17th, when the markets open again, Monday the 17th, with an event that's later known as the St. Patrick's Day Massacre, 3.5 billion euro of worth of companies on the Irish Stock Exchange is wiped out in one day.
It was just crazy, but also we really shouldn't call it the St. Patrick's Day Massacre.
No, right, it's a terrible
enough
name
history
for it.
in Ireland with our like people being mowed down in actual massacres.
Yes.
And then as well as when you think about it historically, the word massacre for a day, it's kind of like, you know, St. Valentine's Day Massacre, you know, like it's things like that. It's always people dying. It's always people been shot.
And I've noticed this, like, I don't know, finance people tend to talk about massacres and war stories and battle plans. Like, just fucking relax, all right? You're not soldiers. Yeah. You're fucking, well, in this case, gamblers.
I was going to say, yeah, they're not soldiers. I was like, if it's Irish army soldiers, they might be in the shape of them. They might be able to be them.
They might be, yeah. They're about as fit as Irish army
They've played
soldiers.
one round of golf every week for the past 50 years. So they're pretty much on a par. Good golf pun there for me at the end to close that out.
Pretty good, yeah.
Didn't expect it. Didn't know that was going to happen, but saw it and went for it.
You wedged it in there.
Mm-hmm. Really drove it home.
Yeah. 4.
Birdie.
So
Albatross.
Irish stock markets lose 3.5 billion in the space of a day. When the markets reopen again the next day, Anglo's share price, which had been at €17.31 in May of the previous year, was now at €6.69.
Oof.
Which means that Quinn's brokers were demanding a lot more money to cover his CFDs, which meant that Anglo had to lend him more money to pay off the brokers. So they ended up giving Quinn Group €370 million over the space of 5 days, all for the purposes of supposedly buying property, while the entire world economy is like, property is massively overvalued.
But at least he didn't go and take all of this money and go and buy more CFDs.
That is true. He's not. He can't do that anymore.
Because that's probably what he would have done.
That's what he wanted to do. He's like, well, it can't go any lower. $6.69. That's a good price to buy at. I don't think he does buy anymore. Maybe he has learned his lesson finally at this stage, but he is still pumping the money into like paying for them. So Sean Fitzpatrick, who's like the head of Anglo Bank, he's freaking out about the share falling, and he gets on the phone to the finance minister, Mr. Brian Cowan, to discuss the Quinn problem. So after Bear Stearns,
he just calls him up, says nothing, plays some Tom Petty, and that's just, it's gone.
'Cause it's free.
Just a small town lad
Free falling.
trying to buy a bank. Just a small town lad trying to make it in the world.
He's like, who's this? But so after Bear Stearns collapsed, the global market starts looking around at banks that have high property exposure and start shorting them. So Anglo is like a perfect fix for that, which means that the stocks start going down again. CFD cycle goes again. More money needs to be sent out to Quinn to pay the brokers. So after the March set of loans, Quinn signs personal guarantees with Anglo in his name and his children's names, agreeing to hand over all their shares in Quinn Group if he can't repay the bank. So now he's putting his own company up.
When you said Annie's children's names, I realized they're all part of they work for him, right?
They all work for him, yeah.
Because as soon as you said it, I was like, like they're collateral or something.
Yeah. I'll give you my firstborn and
It's
the last
It's like
one.
the banking when you're in like secondary school. It's like, swear on your mother's life, and you get to the higher echelons of Irish society, and it's like, I want your firstborn. Swear on your firstborn.
So at this stage, Fitzpatrick and Drum, they're just desperate to get out of the CFD issue, and they're pressuring Quinn to get rid of them. They drew up an agreement with Quinn and sent it over to financial regulator Patrick Neary. In the agreement, Quinn was supposed to buy 15% of the underlying shares. So actually buy them and not fucking bet on them. And that'd be split up between his wife and his family. And then the other 10% of his coverage would just be sold off to various outside investors. The regulator agreed with it all. He liked the idea that it could be done quickly and quietly without alerting all the other Anglo shareholders.
I like the fact that it can be done underhandedly. That's great.
The best part about this plan is that no one will find out about it, because if they did, they'd be annoyed. That's the sign of a good regulator.
My favourite part of this strategy is that there's zero transparency.
Is there any way we could make it more covert? But it's a great plan, apart from they can't find anyone to buy the shares. So the bank is in free fall. No one wants to buy 10% of it.
Of course, yeah.
Like, I don't know how long they spent in this master plan, but it's like, oh, yeah, these shares are worth fuck all now. Well, they're still worth like £6 or whatever. But so meanwhile, PwC are still waiting on an answer for the Quinn insurance books from the previous year. It's been putting the long finger for a while, but Quinn then asks Anglo to release him from his $250 million guarantee over the loans so that he can make the Quinn insurance books look better for PwC. So between Anglo and the financial regulator, they agree to release Quinn for his $250 million guarantee. So again, the regulator's just like, let's just make your books look better for 2007. It'll be a short-term
Have you
solution.
thought about cooking the books?
Yes.
That's what you want from the people in charge of the economy, basically. Like, it's setting the rules for what you should do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sure, listen, these guys know the rules better than anyone else, so they know what you can get away with.
You have to know the rules before you can break the rules.
Yeah, well, exactly. So PwC sign off on these new books, but only after insisting that Quinn Insurance held aside $692 million to cover future losses, which is like a huge amount. But
They were expecting it, though. That seems to be the best part of this plan. That they were like, just in case, future losses up to nearly 700 million, just in case.
Well, they were like, yeah, because he hasn't been setting aside money in case all these people... And again, like from the first episode, his main market, he's given insurance to like young lads that no one else can get, or they can't get insurance from anyone else. So like, you need to set aside money if they have accidents.
If anyone's thinking about who the type of people he was insuring, it's you when you were 80. Isn't like any of the listeners. It's like, you remember what you were like when you were in secondary school, 17, 18, just got a learner's permit. Yeah. That guy. That's the one.
It's you and your mother's Ford car when you like refuse to put the end plates up,
and
but still wanted to be insured.
And again, maybe the chickens won't come home to roost. What if the insurers were wrong all along? All the other insurers were wrong because they were maybe kids can drive and not crash the car.
This is what I'm saying, Jason. There's too much red tape. Here comes PwC being like, oh, you need to set aside this money. That's money that could be put to good use.
Right now.
Expanding his business or betting on a bank, That's money you could be bringing out to Paddy Power, turning it into cash instead of having to keep it aside in case someone gets in an accident. So in May, as the country was on track for a catastrophe, Finance Minister Brian Cowen became Taoiseach and Brian Lenihan took over his position as Minister for Finance.
Walking pudding. Brian Cowen became...
But it's times like this that you need a boost of confidence. You need to be able to look to the captain. You need to look to the man in charge and say, he knows what's going on. So Bertie was out. Brian Cowen is in.
Oh, Cowen, my captain.
But as Quinn assured his investors and dragged his heels about unwinding the CFDs, Anglo's share price keeps falling. They keep paying Quinn to cover his margins. In June 2008, they loaned him another $232 million, bringing his total debt to $1.9 billion.
Good number. Good
number.
On the plus side, it's not two. Stay on the stay positive about this.
I owe them under $2 billion. I've always said, Kev, there's two types of people in this world. There's the people that owe over $2 billion, and there's the people that owe under $2 billion. You're dead right. And you do not want to be in the former category.
There's actually two types of people in this world, Kevin. There's the type of people who divide the entire world's population into two groups of people, and then there's not fucking idiots.
There's people who understand subtlety. But by the summer of 2008, the recession was beginning to creep in, and Quinn Group was having cash flow issues. As part of the Barclays loans, they'd agreed to have a certain amount of cash on hand to cover the debts in like a worst case scenario type deal. And as the economy worsened, Barclays wanted to review Quinn's books. But to do that, Quinn needed to shore up his accounts again, which meant another $200 million loan from Anglo, which brought his debt up to $2.1 billion.
There's two types of people in this world, Kevin. There's the people that owe over $3 billion and the people that owe under $3 billion. I've been beating this drum for a long time.
You can quote me on that. I've been saying it for minutes. But he's still reluctant to unwind his CFDs. He still doesn't want to sell his CFDs because he doesn't want to lose out on all his money. But as part of the last round of fundings, he gives Anglo power of attorney over the shares. So they demand that from him. So now, if it comes to it, they can make him sell the CFDs now.
Okay.
And all of this is approved of by the financial regulator, Patrick Neary.
Now, I have a feeling his name is going to be coming up a lot because the listeners can't see it, but Kevin just did a finger movement, like a gunshot kind of thing. And I was like,
that was the smoking gun.
He's going to be coming up a lot.
Yeah, we'll get into it. But in July of 2008, David Drum came up with a plan. They couldn't find a buyer for the extra Quinn stock, so he decided to pick 10 customers based on their loyalty, discretion, and available funds, and they were going to lend them $45 million each in order to buy 1% of the Quinn stock, and then let the Quinn family buy the other 15%. So Morgan Stanley look after the sales and referred to these people as the Maple 10. Brian Cowen would later refer to them as the Golden Circle. So they can't sell the stocks legitimately. They're giving $45 million to 10 individuals in order to buy their shares.
Yeah. But it's only 1% each.
It's only, so they'll buy the 10% and then Quinn and his family will buy the other 15%. Quinn is still reluctant to take the hit though. The shares are now at €4.85, so he stands to lose a fortune. But the financial regulator had forbidden Anglo from lending to him anymore. And Anglo now had power of attorney over the shares, so he doesn't really have a choice anymore.
He must have just wanted it even more then, because they'd forbid it.
I know, he's like, it's a bargain. They're $4.85. That's a fire sale.
You can't forbid me from doing something and then not expect me to just go and do it. I am going to go date this bank. I'll marry this CFD if I want to. I'll elope with it.
So he reluctantly agrees, and he makes a press statement about publicly buying the 15%, saying that he loves the bank, he loves what they're doing, and he just wants to, buy the shares, not mentioning that he's just lost a fortune. The share price falls again to €4.08. His 15% stake was worth less than a quarter of what it had been the year previous. So Patricia Quinn and their 5 kids were personally on the hook for $488.5 million, which was lent to them by Anglo to cover the purchase. So Anglo has just lent out a shit ton of money to these 10 investors known as the Maple 10, and then Quinn and his family and their kids in order to just buy the shares, which is all very illegal.
Yeah, but at least now that's I'm trying to wrap my head around it, but I don't want to ask too many questions because I know the next 5 minutes is going to be even more stuff. So just barrel through.
Sure. And again, this is all overseen by the regulator. It would later come out that Con Horan of the regulator's office had signed off on the loan from Anglo.
Con Man Horan.
Yeah, absolutely. They signed off on the loan from Anglo to the Quinn group to buy the shares. Quinn was pissed at Anglo. He sent Drum an angry letter saying he felt like they'd forced his hand and he felt like the regulator and the bank had ganged up on him for making him sell the shares.
I hope, because I reckon by the time I'm 30, like I would be like a better person and I would be able to own up to my mistakes. And I'd be like, no, I can see why other people would be annoyed at me here. This is probably my fault. But he's like, he is in his 50s. Is he 50 or 60 now? And he's so far into this. Yeah. He's after losing the guts of a couple of billion and he's blaming other people still.
Well, now look at it this way, Jason. If you bet a load of money on a horse and then the horse didn't win, you'd be pretty pissed off at the owners of the horse. I'd
be pissed at the jockey.
Be pissed at the jockey. And then if they said, listen, we'll all do a hush deal so that we don't have to admit how much you lost, you'd be like, well, fuck you. Mm-hmm. Why did you lose?
I'm from Carlow. I'm from horse country, so this actually does make sense.
Yeah, I need to. There's a lot of horse metaphors I've written into this script just to like to keep you in. So here we go. On the 15th of September 2008, while John Delaney was handing out golden tickets, the Lehman Brothers collapsed. The fourth biggest investment bank in the US was gone. People were panicking now. If Lehman Brothers could collapse, then anyone could collapse. Especially a bank with a high exposure to property like Anglo. So there was a run on Anglo Bank. It's like, I don't know if you ever saw It's a Wonderful Life.
Well, I was going to say, there's no need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, like this is just because the biggest financial institutions after collapsing, just because that doesn't, you know how, this is actually how things often happen. You know, when there's a collapse, it's at the top down. It's the biggest institutions that fail first, and the smaller individual ones are usually fine.
Yeah, I mean, again, you should have been there writing the speeches for these banks. Like, it's fine. Just because when the big ones are gone, that actually means there's more room for the little ones.
It's actually more competition, so there's more money for people, the public, because they get to shop a deal.
Well, people didn't see it that way, Jason. They thought Anglo was done for, so there's a run on the bank, they start taking their money out. By the end of September, Anglo was losing $1 billion in funding a day. So there's $1 billion being withdrawn every day.
Oh, it's so much money. Like, I can't even. My only reaction is to laugh at it. Like, I just don't know even. I don't know what that means. It's crazy money. But so Anglo's on the verge of collapse, and the government have a late night meeting on the 30th of September, after which they issued the 2008 bank guarantee. So the main aim going into the meeting for Brian Cowen and Brian Lennon Jr. was to stop Anglo collapsing. It's like losing $1 billion a day. If the bank runs out of money, it'll fold. And they want to stop that happening, and they don't want it to happen to the other banks then later on. So, well, what the banks tell Lenihan and Cowen, they say the problem isn't a solvency problem. They say they're not running out of money. The issue is a liquidity problem. They just don't have the cash on hand. Like, we're good for it, but our money's tied up in assets and that. So what they need... We're good for it. We don't have the money in cash because it's all out in...
Yes.
in things that have caused a lot of debt.
It's all invested in ghost estates and international property funds that are worth fuck all.
You know, it might as well be gold.
Yes.
That you can just bank on that.
So they're like, listen, all we need is a guarantee. They need a bit of assurance from the government. So the government said that it would cover all customer deposits and the bank's own borrowings across the 6 main banks to the potential sum of €440 billion, which was more than 10 times the national debt and twice of Ireland's GDP at the time.
Oh,
so they're like, it's
okay,
secured.
So I didn't know that things got this bad. I had no idea.
So they don't. It's not that they're spending that money, but they're basically like, we will guarantee. They guarantee.
But the reason
everything.
They're guaranteeing it is because they expect that this is a strong possibility.
No, what's happening is like there's people are panicking. They think that the banks are going to collapse, so they're taking their money out. But the government says, if the bank runs out of money, don't worry, we, the Irish government, will cover it. So don't worry about it. And that means that people won't take the money out because they're like, right, well, it's not going to... The thinking is if Anglo disappears and my money's still in there, it's gone. But if the government says they'll pay it, then okay, there's no need to like rush to take it out. So then the banks have more time to get along. And you know, this is out of my... I don't
that does make sense in terms of keeping the bank afloat.
It does. And your friend David McWilliams was writing in September of that year, he was writing about how this is what needed to be done. So what I understand the issue is that, so the guarantee was a good temporary fix to like instill confidence in the bank. But the issue was they guaranteed everything. Like all the risky stuff, all the stuff were like in a normal state of affairs, the people who would get paid last. So there's a thing called subordinated debt, of which there was 11 billion, which is basically like, as I understand it, like the last shit to get paid. And they're like, we'll cover that. So they're like, what could have been done is that they give a guarantee on all the new stuff that comes out. They could have guaranteed stuff up until a certain point. They could have guaranteed some of the less risky stuff, but they're like, all the shit that you fucked up with, all the mad speculative lending that you did, we'll cover that. Don't worry.
Okay.
Which puts them on the hook for potentially an awful lot of money.
But I feel like that's the only way to do it.
Well, so what they were presented with, what Lenihan and Cowan were presented with, is basically you give us the money or the banks collapse, and that's it. But they're also, there was other ways I suppose it could have been done, and the banks either didn't understand or lied about how exposed they were. They were like, we have the money, we just don't have it on us now.
Didn't understand.
Well, see, the shocking thing is that
actually, yeah. So what am I thinking?
Worse.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I've listened to you tell this story now for like 3 hours. I have 100% confidence, and they don't know what they're doing.
They don't understand how, because I think at the time they were like, right, worst case scenario, property loses 20, maybe 30% of its value, and we bounce back. But in reality, it would go on to lose like 50, 60% of its value, and they were just fucked. And like other banks had collapsed. Do you remember like the Northern Rock Bank?
I do, because they used to sponsor Newcastle, I believe, or someone along the lines. Yeah.
So there was a precedent of like these banks could collapse, and then there was the American ones we talked about. But the Irish banks were like, well, that's not going to happen. It's just a case of we left our wallet in the other pockets. We just need a little pick me up to get us over this. So Ireland becomes the first country in the world during the global financial crisis to introduce this kind of guarantee. They set it up for 2 years. They do a 2-year guarantee of the banks. Apparently, the British Chancellor, Alistair Darling, heard about this news like on a radio bulletin the next morning.
What a name. Alistair Darling.
Alistair Darling. We have to keep some secrets now, don't we, darling?
I would just be referring to him in his full name all of the time. Alistair Darling. We have to go to the pub.
When he called up Brian Lenihan and asked him to like reverse the guarantee, because then it put pressure on him to do the same thing for the British banks. Presumably, Lenihan just said, calm down, darling. So the banks had just been, and in fairness, it does work in the short term. People stop withdrawing money. Everything calms down for a little bit. On the 4th of October, so 4 days after the guarantee, Sean Fitzpatrick went on RTÉ radio and said that Anglo-Irish Bank's problems were purely to do with evaporating global liquidity. He flatly denied critics' charges that the bank had been reckless in making too many big loans to property developers. He said he was grateful for the state's help, but he refused to offer taxpayers an apology because it wasn't his fault. The cause of our problem was global, so I can't say sorry with any kind of sincerity, said Sean Fitzpatrick. Later that day, Fitzpatrick gave another speech in which he advised the government, who were in the middle of trying to pull together a budget after all this, he advised them to cut spending on what he called the sacred cows of Irish society, notably children, the elderly, and healthcare. So in one day, he's like, listen, it's not our fault. I can't say sorry to you for this guarantee and mean it. This is just the way things are going. What you should be doing if you're worried about money, stop spending so much on children, old people, and fucking medicine.
Wow. Yeah, and on these schools, they've got a lot of art programs, don't they? And some sports. What are we doing with these? And they actually...
That's money you could be
I've
giving
realised,
to me.
why do children have books if they're listening to the teacher talk? What's the point in this? Why
There
are
you
they...
go.
They'd be better off listening than writing stuff down. They'll take it in better. They'll remember it. Also, remember, hark back to a time when we used to have hedge schools. I think that was a better Ireland. Why do we need these like brick and mortar actual roofs, things like that? Superfluous, Kevin.
Well, when you think about it, do they really need the hedges at all? You know, you have to pay someone to look after them. Just go in a ditch on the side of the road.
Just let your...
Hedges are a luxury.
In future, at 9 o'clock in the morning, let your kids just walk out into a field on their own. And then they'll come back with some street smarts, some field smarts.
So after this guarantee, so 3 months after the guarantee in December, Anglo under Sean Fitzpatrick would spend €53,000 on Christmas hampers and wine and €24,000 on panto tickets for their clients. Yeah. So this is after his "you need to stop spending money on the old folks and the children" speech. He then, knowing that his bank is covered by the Irish taxpayer if things go badly, just start, like, I don't know. Yeah,
it is fucked. It's one of those things that you're kind of like, how would anyone make that decision? But they're probably looking at it going, right, well, we're a bank, so you need to keep up appearances. Like, these are things that they always do to let you know that it's not like crazy. What's worse is like, that's one thing. It sounds terrible, and it's like 70 something grand. And you're like, that's fucked because they're telling you like, but it makes sense for a business. Maybe I'm trying to just play devil's advocate. What I don't understand is how they would then take bonuses.
Well, yes.
Like, I could see them keeping up appearances, like, the customers, the people who've bought a share for 45 million, etc. Even not the Quinns. If the Quinns got panto tickets.
It was just them and the Quinns at the panto having a right old time.
Yeah. Look behind you. Oh, it's the entire nation of Ireland with pitchforks and fire. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. That's basically his idea of how to deal with this crisis.
So in October, shortly after the bank guarantee, the financial regulator Patrick Neary went on primetime and gave a shocking interview about the guarantee. You can go and watch that on YouTube if you want. He's just like, it's like a masterclass in not answering questions. He's like got 2 or 3 lines that he's memorized. He's just being asked like, why have we covered the banks? Is this morally right what we've done here? And he's just like, that's as the financial regulator, I do the best that I can in order to regulate the finances. That would
be an ecumenical matter.
It's genuinely like, it's 7 minutes and he just dodges. He doesn't even dodge questions. He just, like, you can see him sort of like his eyes glaze over and he just reads the lines that he's memorized. And it's shocking.
But it's like if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a question.
Or in his case, you can just stand there, just take a wrench to the face and be like, as the financial regulator. He's just, so the economist Colin
McCarthy. That's why you get paid the big money. Like, that's why you get paid, like, to have that brazen bare face. Like, just to sit there and take it.
Yeah. Well, Pat Neary, you need a good demeanor in order to take the shit. You need to, like, reassure people that you know what's happening. So the economist Colin McCarthy described the interview. He said, "What happened was that everyone in Ireland had the idea that somewhere in Ireland there was a little wise old man who was in charge of the money. And this was the first time they'd seen this little man. And they saw him and said, 'Who the fuck was that? Is that the fucking guy who's in charge of the money?' And that's when everyone panicked."
Yeah, at that stage, really, what you want is an actor. Like, that's where you need your Ronald Reagan.
Yes. That's where you need a former GAA player to come in and be like, "Listen, I can answer questions about the finances, or I can tell you about the All-Ireland final of 2004, where Armagh went up against Tyrone."
I can just puck schlitters over this bar from 60 yards.
Yeah. Do you want me to answer financial boring questions about banks that may or may not have committed fraud, or do you want to hear about my time in the Puck Fada Tour? But that's, I think, well, I'm not saying that this was part of the issue, but I do know in the early 2000s, like, banks would hire GAA players to come in and, like, sell mortgages.
What do you mean in the early 2000s? Right now, it's always been
Yeah.
that hasn't.
If you want to get a mortgage, do you want to get it off some boring old suit, or do you want to get it off someone that you saw play football?
Or do you want to get it off the lad who bullied you when you were 12?
Yeah. Now you'll really show him by taking out a big mortgage you can't afford. But I imagine when they walk in, they're just like, well, listen, while you're signing those documents, maybe have you or your friends ever had any thoughts about how management could play the game better? Like, yeah, sign here, please. And
a 45% interest rate. That doesn't seem right. No, it's like I said at the halftime of the Junior B final in 2007. Fuck your 45% interest rates. This is for the parish.
Jez, you're dead right. What the fuck was Murphy thinking? So around about October, at the end of October as well, the Iceland banks collapsed. The currency devalued 80%, and the stock exchange went down by 90%.
Sorry, that seems crazy because Iceland. Oh,
yeah.
What?
Yeah, remember the Iceland banks, like the bank system collapsed.
In Iceland, everything went okay. Yeah. Fair enough. So, but why did that? Like it. No offense to people in Iceland, I love their Reykjavik is one of my favorite cities in the world. I love Iceland, but sure, that seems like if you were to tell me, oh, Carlo collapsed and just the rest of Ireland didn't realise, like it would just continue, just barreled ahead anyway.
I know what you mean, yeah, but
it's
I guess
like, all 350,000, like it's like Cork. It's like fucking, like it's the size of Cork.
Yeah,
it's the population of Cork though. Like, but if Cork collapsed, it wouldn't cause like a giant ripple throughout the European economy.
But it would make the news, maybe somewhere in the back, in the sports section.
They were the European city of culture at one point, and no one fucking thought about
it. Oh, they talked about it.
Yeah, but no one listened because they never leave Cork.
So at some point in 2008, after the interview, maybe in an attempt to like win a few back for the financial regulator, they fined Quinn Insurance a record €3.2 million, with Sean himself getting a fine of €200,000 over the moving around of funds at the start of the year. Because of this fine, Sean Quinn stepped down from the Quinn Insurance board. So, a fine of 200 grand. That's a lot for a URI.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's one of those things. It's the same as like when you see a club fined for like, oh, you had 80,000 fans screaming racist abuse at one point and throwing things onto a field. Here's 10 grand. Here's 10 grand. Here's what you pay your youth players who aren't even on like serious professional contracts. Then deal with that now. Like,
the management had to do a whip around in the board.
Yeah.
So at the start of December 2008, Anglo shares are worth 408 was the last one, but they're now down to 67 cents in December of 2008. That's not a lot of money.
Oof.
Yeah.
60 cents.
67 cents now, Jason. It's not all that bad.
It's the exchange rate equivalent of 50. That's dollar to euro, straight up.
So things are looking pretty bad. Things are looking pretty dire in the bank. They need a boost of confidence. They need a bit of good news. So at the start of 2008, the financial regulator and the central bank had been looking at the banks as part of their sort of crisis planning in response to the global recession. They're trying to figure out, what state they're in. And they saw something strange when they were inspecting the loan books of Irish Nationwide Building Society, INBS, which was run by Michael Fingleton at the time. And they see this massive loan had been provided to Sean Fitzpatrick in 2007 and then repaid within a month. Later on in 2008, they saw the same thing happen again. A large loan provided to Sean Fitzpatrick in September of 2008 and then repaid by him in October. So they went to Anglo and they're like, what's going on? What's all this about? And it turned out, as part of transparency measures, Anglo was supposed to report the total loans that they'd given out to like the head people in the bank every year on the 30th of September. So every year they'd be like, this is how much money we've given out to our directors on loans.
I'm sure they gave them great rates. I'm sure they gave them a 0% interest rate.
Signed off from me to me. But it turned out that every year Fitzpatrick was sending money to INBS during the review period and then getting it back after the review period in order to hide how much he'd actually lent himself.
Wow.
So that's what the regulators saw in the loans. He was just sending over like tens of millions to another bank, doing the review, getting the money back a couple of weeks later. And they were like, the regulator at the time said that a layperson would expect that issues of this nature and this magnitude would have been picked up by the external auditors who were Ernst & Young, EY. They were the ones that did this review every year. And at no point in 8 years had they noticed that like he was sending out all this money and then getting it back after the review. They're like they'd signed off on the books for 8 years. So after lying for 8 years, Fitzpatrick's true loans were shown for the first time in 2009. He lent himself 87 million, or twice the total of the other 12 directors put together. So he just handed himself 87 million euros from the bank and then moved it in and out every September in order to hide that from everybody.
At this stage, I just like 87 million now is just nothing. The numbers we're talking about, it's a drop in the ocean. That's the trouble. I think I said this year before. By the time I finished this story, they were like hounding people for 8 million back. I'm like, why bother? That's chump. What are you talking about? 8 million? Come on, leave the man alone. If it doesn't start with a B, I don't care.
Yeah, you just lose track of how much money this is so quickly. But it's insane. So because of this, Fitzpatrick steps down on the 18th of December 2008, and then David Drum follows suit the next day. And this doesn't look good for the financial regulator, you know. The fact that they'd known about it since the start of the year back in January, which meant that they knew about it when the bank guarantee was being discussed in 2008, and they never brought that up or factored it in. On the 9th of January 2009, Patrick Neary steps down as well after it emerges that he'd known about the loans. Although he denied that he himself knew about it. His department had known about it. But he took 600 grand bonus on the way out and a pension of 140k a year. But for him to say, if he doesn't know about them, that's even worse, because that's his job, is to know about them. His defense can't be like, sure, I didn't know what he was doing. Sure, he's only the head of the bank. Sure, I wouldn't have.
He's a lovely lad. What is he like around women when he's drunk? I don't really know him, to be honest, personally.
I've actually never met him. So it's bad news for the bank. This loan scandals come out in a time where like their share price is already plummeting. So at this stage, the government wants to step in to stop the bank from collapsing. They want to take control of the bank. Brian Lennon announces that they're going to buy 75% of the bank's shares for 1.5 billion, because the shares are worth 20 cents at the time. So that will essentially nationalize the bank, because the government will be the majority shareholder. But after the loan scandal came out, the government withdrew its 1.5 billion offer, and then they just moved to take over the bank. So Anglo was nationalised on the 20th of January 2009. And Ernst & Young were brought in to advise on the nationalisation, despite the fact that like 2 weeks previously they were in the news for having not noticed. So 2 weeks ago they were up in the news being like, well, I don't know how we missed the fact that he was moving around the guts of 90 million.
Well, it's every 8 years. Have you thought about this? Maybe they only check the books every 10 years. Once a decade. You know, believe in people. You give me your word. You tell me you're not going to do a lot of stupid shit. I'm going to believe you.
I mean, and who knows the banks better? Who knows the crooked books better than Ernst Young? You know, they've been the closest.
I assume that's kind of also like how my mother imagines my life, where she's kind of just looking at me, going, "As long as you keep telling me things are fine, we'll continue with that concept."
God, he's basically running the place.
Just keep telling.
He's doing great. But so the Anglo Bank had just been nationalised, which means that the shares were worthless, which means Quinn lost a fortune on the 15% that he just bought. He made a statement about how the Irish banks had let him down, but he was just going to take the loss and move on. He underplayed just how fucked he was.
I've made every single horrible decision that was offered to me, but also, the banks didn't help me. Why didn't they come in as an ex machina? Why didn't they come in and just save me from my plight?
Why did they let me do this to myself? But so he makes a statement, but people just think he's lost money on the shares. Between the money he borrowed for the CFDs and the other loans, he owed Anglo 2.8 billion, which meant he now owned the new owners of Anglo, the Irish government, 2.8 billion.
I'm sure they were okay with letting it slide.
They were. This is great.
Yeah, sure. Look, no, just get me back the next time. I'll get it. I'll get your 2.8 billion this time. The next time the banks collapse, you catch it then.
What's 2.8 billion between friends? So 3 weeks later, on the 12th of February, more good news came when it broke that Anglo-Irish Bank had lent 4 billion, one of the other banks, for a day, and another roughly about the same amount to Irish
For
Life.
a day.
For a day. So they lent about 7.5 billion to another bank, and then the bank sent it back to them the next day, so that they could both make their books look better for the end of year budgets. So it's like if I sent you 7 billion and then you send me 7 billion of money that we don't have, and then we're like, just look at that, we're not doing so bad.
Not too bad now. No, I saw it the other year. I saw there was a guy from Barcelona that was sold to Juventus, and they basically just did a switch. They swapped the players, but then tagged on an extra bunch of money just to balance books, because it came out this year then that Barcelona I think it's 1.3 billion in debt.
Yeah.
It's over $1 billion for a football club. I was like, why? How did you get there? Because we kept buying lads for 100 million when we didn't have any money.
But if you stop buying them, Jason, then people know you don't have money, and then, they'll lose faith in the team. You got to keep up appearances.
So they went to Anglo, so Barcelona.
Yeah. On the 17th of February, as part of an investigation by the Office of Corporate Enforcement, Brian Cowan admitted to the Dáil that he'd known, when he was finance minister, he'd known about Anglo's plan to lend money to the Golden Circle and about Quinn's plan to buy shares back in the bank. Although their names were protected for months afterwards, the Maple 10, or the Golden Circle, were Paddy McKinlin, Seamus Ross, the auctioneer Brian O'Farrell, John McCabe of McCabe Builders, the developer Jerry Maguire, Belfast's Patrick Kearney, Jerry Gannon of Gannon Homes, the Kildare businessman Jerry Conlon, Sean Riley of the McGarrell Riley firm, and the developer Joe O'Reilly. So their names all got leaked. So they were the 10 people that Anglo had lent money to in order to buy shares of Anglo. So by March, the bank needed a bailout to cover the 4 billion loans.
I'm very glad that you've said this now, because my housemate studied like economics in college, and he's a carpenter now because he hates it and doesn't like the world. But
yeah,
when I was talking to him about like a review of the first episode, telling him like what you had told me, and he kept asking questions like, yeah, but surely what they would have just done then was the government would have just spent a bunch of stupid money bailing the banks out. And then also they would just like run around a bunch of money into other accounts to make it seem like things are fine, like everyone else did. And I was like, I'm not sure because I haven't done the second episode yet, but I have a feeling. And now
isn't it great that he was right? Yeah.
Yeah. But it is crazy when you look at that. Like, that's how the world operates.
Just lie and move around billions, and it'll buy you 2 weeks of time. That's more than enough time to resign for family reasons, take 600 grand, and then fuck off to America. So by March, the banks needed 4.1 billion of a bailout from the government in order to cover the losses for the previous 6 months. So Anglo brought in an Australian by the name of Mike Ainsley. They brought him in to head up the bank in September of 2009. And he brought in Tom Hunterson, a British man, whose job description included calling in the loans lent to Anglo directors over the years. So he wrote to David Drum looking for 8.3 million that they owed him. At the time, Drum was living in Cape Cod. He's just decided it was time to get away from it all, He just moved over to Cape Cod. And in November, they called in the loans of Sean Fitzpatrick and his family, which were 110 million. So the boys are looking for the Anglo money now, because So Anglo had lent the directors these huge sums of money. They basically lent themselves this money. So there's the 10 guys that they lent money to buy shares, which was illegal. And then they also lent themselves a load of money because they were like, well, we'll never have to pay it back. The bank's going to be here forever. Then the banks collapsed. The government bought over the bank. So now the money that they'd lent themselves, they now owe the government.
That is the worst case scenario.
It's pretty bad. Imagine when he was writing the checks, he's like, what's the worst that could happen? The entire economy in the world collapses and I now owe the Irish taxpayer all this cash? Never going to happen.
Phenomenal. This is great.
Yeah. But, so they brought in, so Hunterson is looking after the directors. They brought in another man called Richard Woodhouse to look after Sean Quinn. As well as the 2.8 billion he now owed Anglo, which means he now owed the taxpayer, his business owed 1.3 billion to the Barclays banks and the bondholders. His interest on the Anglo loans was 3 million a week. Woodhouse went to visit Quinn and his team several times, trying to express to him how fucked he was and telling him he needed to start selling stuff if he wanted to survive. In February the following year, so 2010 we're in now, They had a meeting in Dublin where he told Quinn to start selling properties and to put Quinn Insurance up for sale. Quinn didn't like that. He told Woodhouse that without a Quinn at the helm, the insurance place would fail. Which, I don't really know how that... So he...
If we don't have the guy who knows nothing about how insurance works at the head of the... How is it going to operate?
He is under the impression that all of his businesses... It doesn't make any sense because he keeps saying they're like extremely successful businesses, but he'll also say that if I'm not there, it'll fall apart. Oh, it's a well-oiled machine. It basically runs itself. But without me, the whole thing will be on fire within a week.
Yeah, but that it does make sense. Like that, not in terms of like that's bollocks, but I can 100% see how a man who names every single one of his businesses after his name.
Oh yeah.
Would think that. It's like that concept of like anyone who names their business after their own actual surname or name. You're basically saying, for my business to be successful, you have to like me as a person.
Yes.
Which is nonsense. They'd have a business separate. It's like Tesla isn't called Elon Musk Limited.
Well, it pretty much is. It is called Tesla after Nikola Tesla.
Yes, but he's not Elon Musk.
That's true. And he is dead. But
that was a horrible example. That was a horrible example for me. I could have used anything else. I could have said like Amazon. Even that's not great, but like Google, Facebook, obviously. Nowadays, the biggest companies are kind of tied to the person.
Yes, it's a personality thing.
But no, yeah, because that was idiotic. I should have used a different example. I apologize.
Well, the big companies is like that's most famous. Yeah, I suppose you need to pick a company that like we don't know who runs it.
Yeah. Because you don't want to have your it makes no sense.
Yeah.
But anyway,
so on the 20th of February 2010, 120,000 people marched in Dublin to protest Anglo Bank. A few days later, on the 24th of February, Gardaí raided 3 offices of the Anglo Bank. They spent all day seizing documents relating to Sean Fitzpatrick's loans from Anglo, the cooking of the books with Irish Life and Permanent, and the loan from the bank to pay the Maple 10 / the Golden Circle. And 3 weeks later, they arrested Sean Fitzpatrick, the first high-profile banker to be arrested since the crash. So, bit of progress.
Yeah, I also feel you're playing fast and loose with the word banker.
How so?
Because he just owns a bank. I don't think that makes him a banker. Like he obviously has no understanding of how to deal with money.
Well, yeah, I suppose he understands how to give himself money.
Yeah, like he knows how to hemorrhage billions. I don't think that makes him a banker.
No.
It's like, I'm a fighter. I've lost 400 fights of 400. Yeah, I don't know if that makes you really...
No one knows the insides of a ring better.
Yeah. I'll tell you this, there's no man in the world who knows more what it's like to be knocked out than me.
Yeah. So when all this is happening, the new insurance regulator, Patrick Brady, he wants a plan put in place for Quinn Insurance in case Quinn Group goes bust over the Anglo loans. He needs Quinn Insurance to have 40% solvency if they want to keep operating, which means that they need a cash injection from somewhere, presumably from Sean Quinn himself. But Quinn won't produce the money for some reason. Well, in their eyes, he won't produce it for some reason. The reality is he's broke as fuck, but they still think he's a billionaire. So in March...
This guy who's hemorrhaging a bunch of money, he won't give us any money.
Yeah, but they don't know that he's lost all this money. They just think he's being tight. They just think he's from Cavan.
Yeah, but also it is that thing about like the tightest people in the world are the rich. Like,
well, sure, yeah.
They're not the people that are like, oh yeah, I'll buy your meal for you. No, the reason they have money is because that's not what they do.
But this isn't even like, will you give us money? It's like, will you put money in your insurance company?
Why would he do that?
Why would he do that? You're right. It's there for making money, not for fucking spending money.
Yeah. That's throwing good money after bad. I'm sure. I know. I've been doing that for the guts of a decade, but I'm not going to continue to do that for your benefit.
I do it when I want to do it. If it's CFDs, that's a different story. But in March 2010, after weeks of hammering Quinn for cash injections, Brady found out about all the bond guarantees Quinn had on his properties that he was using as collateral for the insurance company. So Quinn was using property as proof that he could afford to pay out insurance claims if he needed to. So he hadn't got like cash on hand for a lot of it, but he had like, assets, and he said these assets are worth whatever.
I don't have cash, but I have like 100,000 houses that nobody wants to buy. Surely that's worth something.
Well, he had decent enough property, but what he'd done is that he'd also used the properties as guarantees to the bondholders when he was getting money for those. So if he couldn't pay his debts to the bondholders, they owned the houses. And he was using those same houses to prove that he could pay his insurance things. So he's like, as long as nothing bad happens, I have all this money.
Well, again, yeah, but if nothing bad happens, he's fine.
Yeah, he's a good man to be in insurance. See, this is the thing that, like, this is where me and you are going wrong. This is poor people mentality. When I have a tenner, I just see that as a tenner. When a rich man has a tenner, he's like, well, I can use that €10. I can promise to this company, and I can also promise it to that company. I can use this tenner to prove that I can pay this person back if I get a loan.
And pay my rent with it as well.
And pretend it's €100 to gamble on using this bank. And also I've spent it.
And still try to write it off for tax.
And if I lose it, then it's everyone else's fault.
It's a global problem.
It's just the way the markets are going. Because Quinn is still refusing to do anything to fix up the insurance company, on the 30th of March, the regulator started court proceedings to put Quinn Insurance into receivership. So it's basically they appoint some outside body in charge, which in this case was Grant Thornton. So no company had been put in administration in Ireland in 20 years. This is a big deal. So they're basically just like, you can't run this place. We're putting these guys temporarily in charge until you sort it out. So when the administrators came down to meet Quinn, they told him the administration would be lifted, it'd all be sorted if he fixed the guarantees and if he injected cash into the business. And for most of the management, so they went down and told everyone this, and for most of the management in Quinn Insurance, this was the first time that they'd heard about the issue with the guarantees or that there was a liquidity problem.
What a day that must have been. Just to see, like, wait, what's happening? It's your life's ruined. The whole thing's gone. You're like, oh, right. Pint? Anyone? After work pints, everyone? Get the morale together?
Can't afford that. Also, your favourite pub's just been closed. Welcome to 2010. So Quinn's not happy with this, so he flips out over the administrative news. He writes letters to all the political contacts he has. He's given out about they're endangering 6,000 jobs across his businesses. But Brian Lenihan goes on TV the next day and he says he's in favour of the takeover. So Quinn goes and gives an interview to Tommy Gorman of RT. Tommy retired the other day, actually. In the interview, he says, I made mistakes, but Sean Quinn doesn't know anyone anything.
I've made a few.
But
then again,
he admits,
too few to mention. And more, much more than this, I did it my way. He's like, what if I just fucking spend all of the money I don't have? What if I blame everything on everybody else? What if I take no responsibility for anything I've ever done?
It's a good...
You did it your way, Sean. Fair play to you.
Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for you now. I hate you as a person and as a man, but you do gain a modicum of respect for being the giant bollocks.
But brass balls. So when he goes on to the show, he admits that he put guarantees on the properties that he was supposed to set aside for insurance. But he also says that the regulator knew about it the whole time and that means it was fine.
Which is not fine. It's like, that guy's an idiot. And he's like, he knew about it.
Yeah. But Quinn thinks that the regulator... Well, he's right, I suppose. He thinks that the regulator can choose to ignore this if they want. He doesn't realise it's a new day. He's like, well, you can just drop it. Why are you being such a hard ass about this? And he thinks that the idea of losing jobs is much more serious than punishing him for some balance sheet issue with the insurance.
This arbitrary concept of,
who has money, who hasn't money. It's about jobs. It's about the working man.
Who have I promised money to? Who can't I pay back? What's going to collapse? It's about jobs, people.
So he has his PR team. He basically hires a PR team for this, but he organises 300 Quinn Insurance employees to protest outside the Dáil. Protesters start turning up outside the central bank, picketing to have him reinstated to Quinn Insurance. His local politicians all start calling the new financial regulator, who's a man called Matthew Elderfield, and they're asking him, what's going on?
This is great. I think the only time you'll ever see that, or I imagine the only people who picketed were his own staff.
Oh, I told him.
Like, no, if you don't go and picket right now, you're going to lose your jobs.
Well, see, so initially, when I knew bits of this when I started off, and I kind of thought along what you're saying, but people genuinely loved him because he was gone. Like, so he had no power over them having their jobs or whatever, but they saw him as like, they wouldn't have had a job if it wasn't for him in the first place. They genuinely thought that he was being fucked over by the banks. Because also at the time, this is like 2010, so all that stuff about the loan scandals and all that was in the news. Sean Fitzpatrick, the head of Anglo, had just been arrested. The bank had to be nationalised. The taxpayer had to step in. And in their eyes, like, good old Sean Quinn was just another victim of the corrupt bank. They didn't know about the CFDs yet. That hadn't become public knowledge.
Yeah.
So this is our boy who's just being fucking done dirty by the regulators and the bankers who fucked the country.
Okay.
And now they've just fired him for nothing. For what? For not having money in the books? A load of bollocks, Jason.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah,
I'm loving it.
I think I sent this to you, but like there are at least 2 songs that I found about Quinn and about how he was fucked over by the banks. I think I sent it to you. There's like 2 folk songs. One's called Set the Record Straight and one's called The Mighty Quinn, which is a cover of a Bob Dylan song. Or like there's a Bob Dylan song called The Mighty Quinn, and I'm sure Dylan would appreciate a song about a corrupt billionaire.
Yeah, that's exactly what he would have.
That's what he would have loved that, you know.
I think that I just have a feeling. I'm gonna guess that Set the Record Straight is a funner song. I bet that's a lunatic.
They're both actually like good songs, which is more shocking.
Really?
But yeah,
Okay, yeah.
They're like folk ballads. But I don't know. They're both great.
Yeah, I'm sure, but I'm sure they're also like performed by people that would do comedy like in May 2020.
But so so eventually the financial regulator has to go down and meet with the local TDs and try and explain to them the rules of insurance and what Quinn had done. But so like Elderfield is a British man as well, and you can imagine how TDs from Fermanagh and Cavan would take to a young lad from England coming down and telling them why they were punishing Quinn, a good local man, over some like insurance regulations.
Yeah,
not too kindly.
I get it.
Yeah,
that you can't have that. You need a lad from the country saying this lad's wrong.
Yeah, see, that's another. So the whole time during all this, like, it's easy. So the heads of Anglo Bank are Australian and English. The financial regulator, they had to bring someone from the outside in because everything here was so fucked. So he's also English. So there's a lot of, British people in charge, and then a lot of Dublin people in charge, which is just as bad, Jason. And they're coming down and saying, our boy Sean Quinn did what? Some messing around with the books or something? I don't know. I don't buy it.
Don't care what you Jackeens have to say. That's my boy.
Exactly. That's my boy. So, yeah, so the administrators, they meet with all these people who are concerned, and they're like, it's fine. There'll be no jobs lost. This is only a temporary thing. Because in their heads, they're still thinking Quinn will just write a check and it'll be sorted. But instead, Quinn takes them to court. He mounts a legal battle. His case is that the regulators knew about the guarantees. They knew about the fact that he double promised his properties. So then it was fine. But the regulators were confident that if it went to court, they would win. And behind closed doors, apparently Quinn's legal team thought the same thing. Because the regulator had a letter from the 2008 incident where Quinn had been caught borrowing $398 million from his own insurance company to pay for the CFD gambles. And in that letter, they barred Quinn from any future involvement with any regulated company. So that was private at the time, but they kind of made it clear to him that if this went to court, that would be released. And that would, I suppose, ruin him as a businessman. Although, based on what happens after this, I don't think anyone would have given a fuck, really. It doesn't seem like anything could touch this guy. But he backs down at that stage anyway. And he lets one of his lieutenants, Liam McCaffrey, he lets him deal with the regulators. So on the 15th of April, Michael McAteer and Paul McCann are officially appointed as administrators for Quinn Insurance. So once there's a receiver over Quinn Insurance, that means that the insurance company can't be used to pay the Quinn group debt, which means that the 1.3 billion that he owes Barclays, like the Quinn Insurance is kind of like one of his most profitable wings, but now that can't be used to pay back that 1.3 billion he owes the other banks. So now, obviously, they're getting a little worried. So they bring in a lawyer called Barry Russell to look after their interests. And in turn, Russell insists on appointing someone he insists on putting in someone from the outside into the Northern Ireland Quinn Group, like Quinn Group NI. So he hires Murdoch MacKillop.
Every name involved in this story is not Irish in any
No.
way.
Well, that's the same thing that Quinn had. So Murdoch MacKillop, a great name, but a Protestant one. He was from Scotland, and apparently Quinn, as soon as he met him in April 2010, he just started giving him shit about the marching season, and then referred to him from then on as that Rangers fan.
Okay, do you know what? I'm back on Sean's side.
See, this is what you'd love, Quinn. You know, he's a great man. He might have toppled the economy, but he's a great man
But he
to the
bought
pint.
jerseys for the local GAA team.
Yes,
remember
indeed.
that.
Remember the good times? So MacKillop's on the Northern Ireland Quinn Group board. There's 2 Quinn Group boards, one in the Republic of Ireland and one in Northern Ireland. The Republic was for the low tax and the profits, and the Northern Ireland one was for the debt and the actual running of the show. A good divide.
So all the good stuff is on the south and all the bad stuff is up the north. That's what it is. You're dead right, Kevin.
You've got your
Kevin,
business
you
in the south for the
double down on it. Go on, continue to say.
100 years into the partition of the north, I think it's a good idea. And
down south we've got this nice, innocent, beautiful area. Up north we've got the dastardly, low down, fucking. I'm not going to finish that sentence.
Yeah. So as a sort of reshuffle, Sean Quinn, Patricia Quinn, Kevin Lundy and Dara O'Reilly all step down from the Northern Ireland board and they just go on to the Republic board. And then while some of the guys Quinn had been forced to hire, they move on to the Northern Ireland board. So this frees up MacKillop to because Sean Quinn and Patricia Quinn and all these people loyal to Quinn are still on the board, the administrators can't do anything without them getting in the way. So it frees them up a bit once they move out to the Republic board. So the ROI board is focused on solving the issue with Anglo and getting Quinn Insurance back on board. And the Northern Ireland board is focused on getting Quinn Insurance back to being soluble. So they laid off 900 workers within a month of the High Court order, which is against what they said that they'd... Well, this is what everyone was worried about was going to happen.
And
so
now,
once the jobs start being lost...
Do people still back him then? Or are they look at the...
Yes, and...
It's not his fault. It's not his fault that we're
losing. It's not his fault,
Yeah.
no. It's not his fault that he took all the money out of the insurance company and the administrators had to step in. It's the administrators that fired the people.
But so at this point they know this. They know that it's the administrators have had to come in because he's run the business into the ground.
Yeah, but they still see it as they're making him keep money on hand for something that might happen. It's a load of regulation. It's too much red tape, Jason. It's bankers sitting in Dublin who don't understand how business is done.
Yeah, so why can't you that's the problem. These bankers in Dublin don't understand that 17 and 18-year-olds around Ireland are more than capable of having 6 pints, jumping in their car and driving home safely on a Friday night. They just don't get it.
They don't understand how things work in the country.
If I keep the tyre smacking the cat's eyes, how can I fall off the road?
So the administrators' plan, they just want to sell off Quinn Insurance as quickly as possible and just use that money to pay back some of the debts. So they want to put it up for sale in June of 2010. On the 3rd of June, Sean Quinn did an interview with Primetime where he outlined his plan to success to Ortiz. This is his idea. He wants Anglo Bank to step in and help run Quinn Insurance and then use those profits to pay off the money that he owes Anglo, which at this stage is the taxpayer. Quinn claimed that when he left the company, it had been making $3 million a week and had been doing great. Now it was losing $3 million a week and laying people off.
Yeah, when he left, it was enough to pay back the interest for
on the loans he had, yes. Well, but in reality, Quinn Insurance was getting hit by the global recession just like everyone else, and they hadn't finalised their accounts with PwC, but they'd been looking at a loss of $115 million for 2009 before anyone stepped in. So when Quinn was still in charge. So basically, he's just pulling these $3 million figures out of his arse. He just went on Primetime, was like, back when I was running the show, $3 million a week. Easy. Now, losing $3 million a week. It's convenient it was the same number.
It is also, the reason the number is that convenient is because of the fact that none of the investors were Irish. So he just kept saying, what can I do to say, if I just kept saying 3, what if I just keep saying 3? Actually, we're making profits of 3,300 million per year.
What's he talking
this
about?
This guy's, I love this. I can't tell whether it's a plant or a number.
So his big proposal that he comes up with to save the company, he wants Anglo to loan him the money to fix the solvency issue. He'll buy Quinn Insurance for €1 and be back in business. So the plan would increase the amount that he owed the bank to just under 3.5 billion. Which is there's two types of people in the world.
There's the people that owe under 4 billion, and there's the people that owe over 4 billion. And he's very much so. I'm going to keep writing. He's very much so in the first category.
Oh yes.
Actually,
absolutely.
wait. Sorry. Is this is now collected, or
Well, so
because he also owes the bank in England?
Oh, he also owes the other bank, but this doesn't.
Sorry. So there's two types of people in the world, Kevin. There's the types of people that owe under 5 billion, and there's the type of people that owe over 5 billion. And let's not get those two people again.
No.
Let's not get them confused, right?
Well, so the bank. So he maintains that because the money is never going to be used, it's just going to be there as a formality. The risk was zero. He's never going to lose it. He just needs to keep the money there in case he needs to pay out money for insurance claims, which is never going to happen. So it's basically, there's no risk. The country should just give him more money to keep the whole thing going.
I know that sounds crazy, but if you just listen to this sentence, insurance companies don't like to pay out what they actually owe you.
Yeah, but he's like, we won't have to pay out anything, ever.
Yeah, I still agree with that.
Makes sense.
It's exactly what the business model is.
So that was his plan A. His plan B was just, why doesn't the regulator just drop everything and stop being such a little bitch? You always got to have two solutions. That's the key. That's a part of good business strategy.
Yeah, pick the one you want and then give him a worse option.
Yeah. So Quinn, he pitched this and he projected that in 7 years, the company would sell stock and then have enough money to pay off the initial loan and the rest that he owed to Anglo. But a key part of the plan was that Sean Quinn would run the business. He maintained that if anyone else ran the company, they would only make half of what he projected. And he showed his profits. Presumably he drew out two little graphs and he was just like, with Quinn, smiley face, $, with anyone else, into the red. Sad face.
See, if you don't have me writing the checks, how am I going to funnel a bunch of money elsewhere? If you hire somebody else, they're not going to cook the books.
Yeah.
Therefore, we're going to make so much less money.
So for some reason, and during this whole demonstration of how much money he's going to make and how he's going to pay back Anglo, it never addresses the fact that he owes 1.3 billion to the other banks. That doesn't. They never talk about paying that back.
Yeah, but they're English.
Sure, listen. He's got a different set of charts for those guys. So his major plan to get back on track, he'd been working on this for a couple of weeks, if not months. And the key plan was to ask for another 650 million in the middle of a recession.
That. I reckon he says he worked on it for a while. It was the day before.
Yeah,
it's like, what if I just ask for more money, please?
650 million in the middle of a recession. And he also wanted it to be interest free, and he wanted to stop paying interest on the other money he owed the bank.
This is why off of the podcast I often vent about the fucking economic situation of the world.
Well, the best bit is that the bank doesn't rule it out because they're like, we need to make some of this back.
Yeah, because if you don't do that, then it's going to collapse and then everyone loses all their money. So once you get so rich and powerful, you can do whatever the fuck you want because you're too big to fail. You are too big to fail. This
is the too big to fail era. It's that old thing about if you owe $1 million to the bank, you're in trouble. If you owe $6 billion to the bank's in trouble. At this stage, he owes them so much money that they need him to be in business so that he has a way to pay it back.
I'm sure as soon as he hit the point of I owe them €1 billion or €4 billion, I'm in charge of this bank now. I might own 28%. They want me to sell it all, but actually I run this thing.
Yeah, pretty much. So in May 2010, and alright, I threw out the Iceland banks collapsed a couple of months previously. You were like, who gives a fuck? Iceland's gone under, boo-hoo. Call me when Tesco's gone.
I understand it. It's too expensive there. Everything's it's with €12 a pint. It's mad. I love it. But Jesus Christ, I could see if that collapses. Yeah, that's why. Actually, maybe that's why it was so expensive when I went there.
They had to make the money back.
Yeah.
The 2 pints. Well, let's see what this does for you. In May 2010, Greece accepted €110 bailout from the European Commission, the EC, and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. So now Greece is getting bailed out. 110 billion.
Yeah. Billion? Oh, God, they're saying $1 million.
No, yeah, we just
I was like, that's not that much. I was like, I could see why people were buying property there in the early 2000s, if that's the case.
Yeah, you could buy a whole country for 110. So it was hoped that this would stop the spread of the bank collapse across the rest of the Eurozone. But so here's a precedent for like the IMF stepping in and taking control. So basically, Greece has been put into receivership the same way as Quinn Insurance. They've had to step in and they're telling them how to run the place now in exchange for this money, which is a bit worrying for the boys in Ireland.
It is. What's more worrying is the fact that I'm going to now, for the rest of this podcast, have to not make Mission Impossible jokes every time you mention the IMF. I'd be like, what did Ethan Hunt think of this?
So back in Ireland in May, Anglo had just received 14.3 billion from the government to cover its losses. There was still ongoing protests happening. Around this time, a group hung and burnt an effigy of Sean Fitzpatrick outside the former Anglo HQ. So, tensions are high.
Doesn't happen very often. When was the last time you saw an effigy burnt in Ireland outside of this?
12th of July every year in the north.
Good point, yeah.
By July 2010, Fitzpatrick had been declared bankrupt. At this stage, it becomes public knowledge that he owes the country 110 million, or he owes the state-owned bank 110 million. So in the summer of 2010, McKiplop's plan was to set aside the manufacturing part of Quinn's business, put a load of debt into it, and then have the banks take a 500 million hit in exchange for shares in the company. The idea would be that after a few years, Sean Quinn could buy back the shares from the bank if he wanted to, and sort of he'd basically take his medicine, pay high interest rates. The bank could take a bit of a hit, bit of a compromise, and eventually, if Sean played ball down the line, he could buy his shares back. Quinn said no.
Mm-hmm. Why would he? Why would he say yes?
Why would he say yes? He said he wouldn't entertain the idea at all. His brother Peter Quinn, who was one of the members, described any debt for equity swap as a fucking deal breaker. Debt for equity being like they would reduce the debt in exchange for some assets or something. He was like, not a fuck, no. We're going to do this the Quinn way.
We're not willing to sell equity. We're not willing to sell property. We're not willing to sell assets. We're not nothing. We're just, no. You can do it our way.
Yes, our way is you give us more, you give us more money. So imagine you you couldn't pay your mortgage back, and they're like, how are you're going to need to sell assets. You're going to need to do something. How about this? I'm not selling anything. How about this? You give me more money and I'll use that to fix my business. And if that doesn't work, well, then you can fuck yourself.
How about this? How about I sue you for more money? You're going to sue the state. Yeah, why not?
Oh, listen, it gets there. But
and if I lose, you're on the hook for all of the lawyer fees. And if I win, fuck you. Like, I think that maybe that's just how it works when you get to a certain level. Like, it's like we were joking about it earlier, but it's genuinely like that's how it works. You're too big to fail, so you can just go no. Yeah. Well, then you're going to fail. Well, I'm going to fail anyway.
This is pretty much what happens. So McKillop has to go to the bondholders, the guys that Sean Quinn's group owns 1.3 billion. He goes there in September 2010, and he just tells them the deal. That means that they just have to take a hit. He just says like he won't play ball. So after that embarrassment, McKillop just says, I'm not going to go in there and look like a tit again. So he just says, fuck it. And he lets Sean deal with them directly from then on. At this point, McKillop is receiving loads of letters from various Quinn employees in the company calling him a disgrace for trying to break up the team. So
stop trying to ruin Sean's good name.
Why are you
tarnishing him, dragging him through the mud.
And for what? A couple of billion? Who cares?
What's 4.5 billion between friends?
So he says fuck it. He lets Quinn work away with the lenders, and while Quinn's pitching his fantasy idea to them, McKillop reaches out to the other party interested in dealing with the Quinn issue. He gets on to Anglo Bank.
There's not. People say that there is an Irish issue. There's not. There's just a Quinn issue.
So, in August of 2010, Standard & Poor said that the cost of bailing out the banks could cost up to 50 billion, with Anglo alone taking up to 35 billion. And 6 days after that announcement, Anglo said that they lost 8 billion in 6 months, a new record for Ireland.
Fair play.
Depositors had taken 5 billion out of the bank in the previous 6 months. And the
But
bank and the government were
it's
now...
just an Irish record. It's not like a world record or an Olympic record. It's, you know, it's kind of like, that's good, but don't get carried away just because you broke an Irish record. You go to compete against people, you know, the world stage. That's not going to mean shite.
You're a big fish in a small pond still. Don't get ahead of yourself. So the banks and the government are like tied together because of the 2008 bank guarantee, where they said they'd cover the money that the banks were spending, which meant that international lenders were charging Ireland higher interest rates because they were seen as a risky borrower now, because especially after what happened to Greece, it meant that it could happen to a country like Ireland. On Black Thursday, the 30th of September 2010, the head of the financial regulator, Mike Elderfield, announced that they'd need another 30 billion to cover the losses on the loans being sold to NAMA. So the bailout was now at 46 billion total for all the banks. The EU limit for deficit to GDP ratio is 3%. And after that news, Ireland was now at 32%.
But sure, that's only a 29% difference.
Yeah, sure, listen, I don't know what they're getting so annoyed about.
Yeah, sure, if I just keep leveraging the debt that I already have to make that money back, it'll be fine.
Well, yeah, see, at this point, the government should stop seeing Quinn as a problem and start seeing him as this is the way we should be acting.
Yeah, we should run the country like this guy.
Yeah, we owe the EU 46 billion. Good. Now they have to listen to us.
Yeah.
If you want us to pay that money back, give us more money. And then maybe we'll
give
get
us
round to
more money, no interest, and your firstborn daughter.
So Quinn was gaining support for his plan by pushing the jobs angle. He also hired an accounting firm to review the Quinn insurance books that PwC had signed off on, because he wanted to prove that they were aware of the guarantees and that no one had raised the issue before. So the accountancy hired agreed that the financial regulator and PwC were aware of the fact that he'd like double booked his assets and that no one had ever said anything before. So in a sense, he was right, and that is, but they sent off this report to the regulator. But the regulator didn't care at that stage. They were just adamant that no deal be done that involved putting Sean Quinn back at the helm of Quinn Insurance.
Which, a hot take, good decision.
Probably, yeah. But so, while Quinn is still arguing over the old figures for Quinn Insurance in 2010, they're still insolvent. They were at 107%, which was well under the required 150%. The new administrators were also shocked at the lack of actuaries that were employed by the insurance firm, and they weren't using a suitable risk model for a place their size.
Actuary? We have no fucking idea what we're doing.
So they walked in, like, there's no one here has any training in insurance appraisal or any real idea of how to run an insurance company. So in order to get Quinn Insurance ready for sale that year, the administrators brought in a proper evaluator to get stock of the place. To make
sure that they could sell Quinn Insurance that year, they built a time machine. So they go back into 2006.
In order to get it ready for sale, they brought in some proper evaluators rather than... So Quinn had been using these people called minimum every year in order to like get the evaluation of how much the company was worth or how much they had it in reserve. So they brought in a new company called EMB to check the figures, and they were like, not at all. This is the figures you've been looking at, the minimum have been given you for the last 8 years or whatever, are useless. So they showed them to the old evaluator, Milliam, and they showed them to PwC, who'd been signing off on this every year, and they were like, oh yeah, whoops. I guess we were wrong. All those figures and evaluations, that's our bad. The place is actually fucked.
Psych.
Like it's the same companies that are like PwC show up in the story in loads of places. They're consulting on all sides, and they've just been wrong for 8 years, and their response is just like, oh yeah, shit, sorry. Well, it looks like you'll need someone to consult on how to sort out this mess. We actually have a couple of up-and-coming people we could send over here.
Oh, yeah. I used to work beside them in Kilkenny back in my KCLR 96 FM days. They were right beside me. I'm kind of like, judging by the people that walked in there, I don't think, I can see how this happened. Like, this is it's not the best and brightest.
Well, they were just there to, like, Quinn is paying them millions over the years to do these evaluations. So they were slightly incentivized to be like, you know what, you're doing a great job. Place looks class. See you next year.
Yeah.
We prefer our next payment in a bag of cash, if possible. Thank you.
If you could actually, if you could get rid of every single receipt that you have of this interaction happening, it'd be even better.
So the administrators were working off of the figures that they had from PwC and from Millium, and under those numbers, they thought that Quinn Insurance was a profitable business, just going through a bit of a rough patch. But now that they've had people go in and look at the books properly, they realize that the business model is dog shit and the place is actually hemorrhaging money at this stage. So selling Quinn Insurance was a key part in helping to pay back the money that Quinn Group owed Anglo, but now it seemed like they weren't going to get anywhere near as much as they thought for it.
It would appear.
Now, in fairness, I did say there was no so the financial regulator actually did report PwC to the Chartered Accountants Regulatory Board over the reviews of Quinn. I don't know what came of that, but at least I don't think nothing happened to them. I mean, they're still operating today. So in December of 2010, the IMF came to town. The bank guarantee had cost more than expected, so Ireland ended up taking a bailout deal of €87 billion from a group later known as the Troika, made up of the IMF, the European Central Bank, and the EU. So 35 billion of that was set aside for dealing with the banks alone. The idea again was to stop the contagion of other banks across the Eurozone. The country was essentially in receivership itself now, and we all had to follow strict rules of austerity that came with the money. So did you ever see that there's like a documentary series about Ireland called 7 Ages, where they do like a different decade for 7 different shows?
Reeling in the years.
It's kind of like that, yes. But so I watched the one in the 90s there a while ago, and there's an economist called John Bradley, and they're talking about the financial downturn and the recession in the 80s in Ireland. And he's just sitting in the central bank doing an interview.
There was a recession in the 80s in Ireland. Surely we wouldn't have overheld our hand. What are you talking about? Let's just barrel into making 250,000 houses that we don't need.
Well, in the interview, he's like, yeah, Jesus, things were getting a bit ropey there for a while. If you'd believe it, there was almost talk of the IMF having to step in and take over the country. Jesus, that would have been shocking.
If you'd believe such a thing.
He was genuinely like, Jesus, between myself and yourself, there was actually talk of the IMF coming in there for a while. God, that would have been a disaster. And this is all filmed in like 1999 or something.
The kind of thing you see on, was it CR Video Vaults? That's the... Shout out to that whoever is doing that YouTube channel is doing a fucking service to Irish history more than this podcast or any other Irish history podcast. Like, they're amazing. Just like watching lads drinking in pubs. I saw a video the other day of the last postman in Ireland on a bike. Like, which also isn't true, because I grew up knowing lads who crashed their vans so that they were made drive a post bike. I knew a guy who crashed 2 of his post vans, so had to then start using a post bike. Instead of firing him, they were just like, no, you just get to drive a bike now.
Get about a bike, yeah. Sure, he knows the routes, you know. You can't buy that sort of knowledge.
People were a fan. I'm a big fan. I love the guy.
Yeah. But, so I think it's time to introduce another character. Peter P.D. Quinn. So Sean Quinn's brother, Peter, had been the president of the GAA from 1991 to 94. He was the chairman of TG Carr. He was a Fermanagh player himself and a successful accountant. His son, Peter Jr., followed him into the accountancy world, and then he got a job in his uncle Sean's firm. He was put onto the International Property Group there, the IPG, and he moved up the ranks and eventually became general manager of the property portfolio, reporting directly to Kevin Lundy. PD looked after property in Russia, Ukraine and India. He headed over to Moscow once a fortnight, and when he was there he'd worked from the Kutsov Tower, which was that 20-storey Quinn-built office tower that was over there. He was in charge of hundreds of millions worth of property in Russia. At the peak, the property portfolio would have been worth like 600 million. And while initially he would have translators read all the documents about the different property things that came across his desk, after a while, he just started signing them without reading them.
Good business savvy.
Well, in the book I was reading, it was like, he'd initially have translators read all the documents for him and tell him what was happening. But after a while, and I thought it was going to be like, after a while he learned how to speak Russian. It's like, no, after a while he just started signing blank documents.
So I started just listening to whatever people told me where it benefits them to lie to you.
Yeah.
They're fine. I can just sign off on a document.
Yeah. So during all this time, Petey was the manager of the local team, his local team back home, the Timor Shamrocks, and he made sure he was home every weekend during gas season.
Once a year they go. Once a year they head out and do the international rules with the East Timor Shamrocks.
So when Anglo started asking about the properties after 2008, Petey figured something was up because Anglo weren't the major lenders for the properties. Like they didn't have that much of a stake in it. So he eventually pieced together that Quinn Group must be in trouble because Anglo's trying to like get at these properties. So by 2010, he was of the opinion that it was only a matter of time before Anglo moved to take over all of the properties that he looked after. And around this time, he noticed that the rhetoric was changing. Politicians from all sides talked about the loans that Quinn owned and other loans as money owed to the taxpayer. This was no longer just like money owed to a bank. This is money taken from the taxpayer. And the new bank managers had been appointed to get as much money back for the taxpayer as possible. They weren't interested in making long-lasting relationships with the borrowers like Quinn. They just wanted the money. So he sees the writing on the wall and he raises the possibility to his uncle several times that Anglo are going to try and take the properties. But Sean won't hear it. He still thinks that Anglo are going to try and cut a deal with him and let him get back into running his companies for the sake of the country, for the sake of the jobs.
Do you not see the people picketing? They want me. They don't know.
Yeah, they want him back.
They don't know the truth. And he's like, yes, but even if they found out the truth, I'm pretty sure they're still going to like me.
That is his opinion. But so by the summer of 2010, Richard Woodhouse, who's part of the new management team at Anglo, he's meeting with Petey once a month to go over all the assets in the portfolio. He's really cagey about the details in these meetings, but for Petey, this is clear proof that Anglo are going to try and go after the IPG properties to try and regain some of the money that Quinn owes them. So Petey figured out that the security that Quinn had given to Anglo for the loans was over shares in the companies that own the assets and not the actual assets themselves. So when he took out the loans, you know, when you take out a loan, you put up a building as collateral.
Yeah.
And you're like, if I can't pay it back, you get the building. But what he'd actually done is so all the buildings were owned by shell companies, sort of. So instead of giving direct access to the buildings, he'd put up shares in the companies that owned the buildings as collateral.
Gotcha. Yes, because he didn't have access to owning the building. Okay.
Yes, which is a technical difference. So then Petey thinks, he goes to our old friends PwC, and he says, you know, hypothetically, if a man wanted to not pay back the bank what he owed,
I have a friend.
Right. It's
not me. No, it's not me. I'm saying if it was me, I'd own up to it. I don't have any problems with that. It's genuinely a friend. He would prefer his name not to be made public.
Genuine. So PwC have already gotten in trouble for fucking up the books of Quinn Insurance for years, like just ticking off on stuff that turned out to be wrong. And there's a meeting on the books in August of 2010 where Petey walks into their office and is like, in theory, I have a friend. How could someone hypothetically get around giving the banks to them?
I'm writing a short story. I'm just looking for some knowledge.
I just need some research.
Yeah.
So that's Petey's bit for now. That's called sowing a seed in storytelling. But in September of 2010, Taoiseach Brian Cowan was drunk on the air after a late night Fianna Fáil Allegedly. In November 2010, the Green Party said that they wanted a general election in the early new year. So like everything was getting geared up towards that. Fianna Fáil were stalling it for a while until in January 2011, a new book called The Fitzpatrick Tapes came out, which outlined conversations between Brian Cowan and Sean Fitzpatrick, the head of Anglo Bank. And it revealed how much Anglo knew about Quinn's exposures to the CFDs, how much contact he'd had with Brian Cowan on the subject while he was Minister for Finance.
It was minimal. Both of those things were relatively minimal.
He barely even heard of it. Well, so it outlines all these phone calls that happened in March of 2008, and then they'd like gone to play golf. They basically had a day out playing golf in July of 2008.
Brian Cowan playing golf is a fucking Jesus. Like, stop. Okay, you can ruin the nation. You can lie. You can put funds of hundreds of millions from one company to the other, and you can promise that to 5 companies at once. But do not treat the Irish public like they're fucking idiots and tell us that Brian Cowan's playing golf.
Well, so what Cowan had said is that it was just a social trip. He was just out having a nice time of golf. But then, this is a great twist for the eventual film or docuseries of this. It turned out that while he was with Fitzpatrick, Caoimhín O'Caolan, who was the head of Sinn Féin at the time, happened to be at a wedding in the same golf resort. So he bumped into Fitzpatrick and Cowan while they were there. And then Cowan had claimed he was just there on a social trip and they hadn't talked about the banking crisis or any of the CFD stuff. It was just there purely for golf. And then O'Caolan was like, well, I bumped into you that day and there were 2 other representatives from the bank there. So what was that about? So then Cowan had to backtrack and say that he had known about all this stuff. It didn't look good.
Yeah, this guy, he shouldn't be. So it's for the non-Irish listeners. It's kind of like, you know, when Sepp Blatter got kicked off of the FIFA panel, he's like, you're not allowed to be part of this anymore. Let's give it to your underling. Like, Brian Cowan is like a less socially adept Bertie Ahern, who people don't like, and he's from the country, so no one from Dublin likes. Like, people from the country liked Bertie. People from the country don't like Brian Cowan. And people from Dublin definitely don't like Brian Cowan.
So the book was published on the 7th of January. On the 20th of January, Cowan set a general election for March. 2 days later, on the 22nd, he had to announce that he was stepping down as leader of Fianna Fáil, and he'd be gone after the next election. But on the 23rd of January, the Greens pulled out of the coalition, so they forced an early election then in February. In that election, Caroline Ford ran as a pro-Quinn independent for Cavan Monaghan, whose policies were basically for the government to accept Quinn's deal. She got 3% of the votes. A big part of being a cowboy is just that people love you. Like, no one wants to root for the sheriff in these things. They don't want someone who does it by the book. They want to get the gunslinger in. But so after that tape book came out, Sean Fitzpatrick spoke publicly for the first time, saying he regretted his part of what had happened, but that he was an obvious scapegoat for the media and politicians, and insisted that he was one of the biggest victims of the banking crisis because he'd lost money, Jason, and that his whole social circle had diminished. He'd lost his social circle was gone, and he'd lost all that money that he'd stole from the bank. Well, not stole, he just gave it to himself.
This is, I love this man.
That same month, his BMW, which had been seized at auction as part of his bankruptcy case, was raffled off by National Recycling, and the winner won the right to crush the car. This is a fun little...
That is nonsense.
Yeah, it didn't really make sense because it was like an 03 BMW, but for some reason it didn't start. And then you got the right to pull the handle to have it crushed into a cube.
For how much money would people pay for that?
I think it was sold for $1,000.
You could sell the parts. Oh, I'm sure they probably sold the parts.
It was a different time, Jason. No one wanted to be driving around a BMW of a banker. You'd be better off just crushing it.
And that's what everyone thinks, and it's hilarious. And we crushed the car. Realistically, you paid someone £1,000 and they sold all the individual parts for that for about 20 or 30. All of that, and then they crushed the shell of the car.
That's how it should be.
There's no way they crushed the engine and all of the actual the things.
No, I don't think there was an engine in it.
Yeah, no, it was a shell of a car.
Yeah.
But also, that's the point that you have to think about. This is during the recession. This is just afterwards that people are willing to pay money that could be spent on things that need to improve the country, to crush the car, to teach a billionaire a lesson about a BMW. This isn't a Maserati. This isn't some kind of a fucking Lamborghini. This is a fucking BMW. I know a lot of lads in Carlo that drive fucking 98 M3s. You're grand. It's fucking $2,000. You're good to go.
Put them in a crusher. Eat the rich. So the new government that came in was made up of Fine Gael and Labour, with Michael Noonan as the new Minister for Finance. I was watching a video at some point during the research of this, in the middle of the recession, Michael Noonan went on a speech about how young folk emigrating was a lifestyle choice and not financially motivated at all. They'd been doing it for decades because of the boom and bust economics.
Yes, 2019 Jason Brennan, just because he just wanted to do it.
But your financial regulator in the middle of a recession just being like, Asher, listen, I know loads of young people are leaving the country because we bust the economy. It's nothing new. It happens every 20 years. That's just the way things are. It happened in 1980. It'll happen in 2021. It's just how the thing works.
Do you know, we had the famine, do you remember? And then
I like the idea that he's self-aware enough to know what happens every once in a while, but like maybe there's some sort of overarching problem if this happens every 20 years. We'll have no more questions about the economy.
Well, here's the thing. If it keeps crashing every 20 years, why do you trust us to run it? That's on you. That is 100% on you.
In fairness. So, after the new government has settled in, McKillop brought his proposal for the Quinn problem to the new finance minister, Noonan. At this stage, he'd been in charge of Quinn Group for a year. He'd found 800 million had gone from the shareholders' funds to Quinn's family, 700 million for CFDs, and 106 million for Sean Quinn Jr. just to buy the Belfry Hotel. This was after Sean Quinn had given a commitment in December of 2009 that he wouldn't raid any more company money, but in February 2010 he took out another 6 million to cover fees related to the Belfry Hotel. McKillop had also discovered Coil Investments. In 2007, Quinn had set up an investment group to invest his employees' money as a way to sort of repay them for their hard work, and he was so sure of the investment that he issued a personal guarantee to everyone who put their money in. So that means even if the investment went south, he would personally pay his employees that had put money into the scheme. So there was over 7 million invested in Coil by each of his employees, and all of the employees that paid into it got a letter signed from Sean Quinn guaranteeing the money they put into it. So what sort of diverse portfolio do you think he put all that 7 million into in 2007?
Is it CFDs?
Oh, it all went into Anglo. It's
Well, sure, look, I know it's bad money, but if I send good money after it, it'll put its arm around the shoulder saying, you don't want to go about in this paradise. Why don't you just come back with me? We'll go back here towards profit. Let's just, come on. No.
But
Stop living in the reality. Live in a fantasy. Why don't we just do this?
He was so convinced of it that he got all of his employees to put 7 million euro into it. And then, was so sure of it, he was like, if it fails, I'll pay you back 7 million, and it won't fail.
But that's 7 million. Earlier on, we were saying 8 million's a drop in the ocean. Now it's afterwards, and it's 7, so it's nothing.
So the big sticking points for McKillop is that he took 6 million out for a hotel, and so Quinn takes 7 million out of the company to pay back his employees, to cover this guarantee, which McKillop is also annoyed about. But yeah, at this stage in the story, you're like, 6 million here, 7 billion there. Come on, McKillop. You're just a fucking Rangers fan. That's the real issue. Why can't you just let our boy Quinn go? Come on.
No, I understand what's happening here. This isn't about the plight of a nation. This isn't about running the European economy. What this is a 100-year-old rivalry between two football clubs based in a different nation that for some reason we keep proliferating the notion that it's only based on religion.
Yeah.
Irishmen watching Celtic having never been to a mass in their life.
It's them Protestants, man. That's the issue. But so after a series of meetings that McKillop had with the Regulator and Anglo, they came up with the idea of taking control of Quinn Group's shares. Remember, they'd be put up as security for some of the loans he'd taken in 2008. So they figured they can just take over. They could use that to essentially take over the business, appoint their own board of directors, and run the thing without Quinn. Then the bank would run the place on behalf of the lenders, sell the insurance part to Liberty Insurance, who wanted to buy over Quinn Insurance.
So ostensibly they're like an administrator, that they've come in and he's said that I'll give this as collateral if this can't work, and it didn't work, and then they're like, okay, now we're in charge.
Pretty much, yeah. So this is McKillop's plan.
But then Sean Quinn says, no, that's not acceptable.
Yeah, he's like, that Ranger's up to it again. Did he put you up to this bollocks? So they're doing this all in secret. They're doing this without Quinn's knowledge. They bring it to Michael Noonan, the finance minister. He signs off on the plan, and they aim for the end of March 2011 to take over the running of Quinn Group. So they get in KPMG to set up a new board of directors. There's meetings between the regulators, the bondholders, the lenders, Anglo, and Quinn Group, the Northern Ireland
for my
Quinn Group.
money, too many people quinterfere in Sean's business deals.
He would have loved that pun. That's the sort of thing. All these quinterferers coming in, taking over my quintrests. So they've got basically everyone in a cabal to try and take it over as quickly and without Sean finding out until it was too late. So
when we started this podcast in 2018, I would have backed as heavily as Sean Quinn did of his company not going completely defunct, that we would have never used the word cabal in the podcast.
Oh yeah, I just use cabal legitimately there.
Yeah, we used to do podcasts where there was men without legs running around in bowls in Dublin.
And now we're talking about financial cabals.
Now we're dropping cabals.
We've come a long way. But as part of so on the 14th of April 2011, they moved in. There's 115 different receivers, consultants, bank representatives, new board members, lawyers. They had security people, bodyguards, and a PR team, all headed down to Cavan.
They were about to change the population of Cavan by a considerable percent.
So they're also all like they all drive down in like inconspicuous cars in groups, because if they all drove down
for transits
together, because they would have tipped off Quinn if they were coming into his home turf all together. So they're all spinning down in Ford Transits in the back of vans. But so meanwhile, Richard Woodhouse and Mike Ainsley of Anglo Bank had asked for Quinn, Kevin Lundy and Darragh O'Reilly to meet them at 9:30 in Dublin for a meeting. So the plan was to send all these 115 people down to Quinn County, and then at the same time have Quinn up in Dublin out of the way when they broke the news to him. But also at the same time, there was a load of Quinn supporters heading down to the central bank with a petition with 90,000 signatures to remove the administrators and put Sean Quinn back at the helm of Quinn Insurance.
Why?
So they had 90,000 people signed it.
Why in the history of the world do people think that this is ever a thing that's going to work? Like, sign a petition just so that the people who are making the laws based off the fact, all of the facts that they have, like that this is what we're going to do because it makes sense. Yeah. Oh, we've a load of people who have no idea of what's going on signing a piece of paper saying, I don't know what the fuck's going on, but I'd like this to happen. Great. You continue to do that.
That's fantastic.
You fucking go to bed, sleep easy tonight.
So during the Anglo meeting, they had one of their executives called Alan Dukes lead the meeting. They had him come in as the token Irishman. He was the most senior Irish executive in the place, and they thought that Sean would receive it better from him rather than an Australian or an Englishman. So Dukes told Quinn that the lenders and Anglo had made a deal. They were appointing KPMG as receivers of Quinn ROI. Anglo was going to take 70% sharehold of Quinn ROI, and the rest would go to the other lenders. They'd appoint a new board. No jobs would be lost. Business would continue as usual, but without Quinn or his family involved in any way. They're also appointing a receiver on the International Property Group to take control of all the properties, and they're going to recommend Anglo to let Liberty Insurance take over Quinn Insurance. So Peter Quinn, Lee McCaffrey and Sinead Gogan were the only ones that were going to lose their jobs that day. They were all going to be kicked off the board because they were seen as being too closely aligned with Quinn. So Quinn, this is a shock to Quinn. He'd never expected the banks to actually try and take over everything. He figured they might have the balls to go after Quinn Insurance or something, but the manufacturing part was profitable and the properties were all in his children's name, so he thought they were off limits. But as he was sitting in that meeting, in the space of about 90 minutes, the group of 115 had just arrived in Cavan, served all the notices, taken over the buildings, and seized control of the boardrooms and the IT system. Quinn was locked out. And that's the end of episode 2, The Anglo Menace.
We didn't expect this to run as long as it did, but it's a fun story, and Kev made 32 pages of notes.
So, there you go. So, our boy Quinn, he's just been done dirty by the regulators.
The bastards. The begrudgers. The begrudgers is what it is.
The begrudgery, the Rangers football team, they're all in on it from the top down.
Instagram, Facebook, the whole lot.
So so these are boys down and out, but the next episode Quinn strikes back. We'll see how our boy defends himself.
Oh.
I actually couldn't figure out it. So at the minute, these episodes are called episode 1. What did I call it? A new Quinn?
I think it's called the Quinfinity Gauntlet.
At the minute, episode 1 is The Rise of Quinn. Episode 2, The Anglo Menace. And episode 3, Quinn Strikes Back. The Quinfinity Gauntlet is much better. What would the individual episodes be then? The Quinter Soldier. The Quinn Credible Hulk. This is gold. I need to rewrite the whole fucking series now.
The Avengers Quinfinity War.
That's too similar to your Quinfinity Gauntlet, I'm afraid.
It still counts. No, I get it.
I'm sure there's some. What's Ant-Man's name?
Paul Rudd.
Paul Rudd. Ant-Man 2, Sean Quinn.
Quinfinity Paul Rudd. It doesn't make sense, but people will like it regardless because they've no taste in comedy. I don't like to laugh. I just like to see people that make me feel not
There
sad.
he is now.
That's what talent is these days.
Why do people tune into this show then?
He's literally, his biggest talent is he used to be on Friends and you like him. Yeah, to the fact that he's never done a serious film that's great. Like, the only one he's like, Prince Avalanche with Emile Hirsch is, for my money, the best film Paul Rudd's ever done. And Emile Hirsch takes that by the throat. Like, it's that guy.
Peter Quill, Star-Lord. I don't know. Ode Quinn, Anthony Hopkins. Listen, we'll do an entire episode where we just...
Anthony Hopkins.
Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins is Ode Quinn in Thor Raga Quinn.
He's going to play Sean in the upcoming biopic. He's going to do it for 9 minutes. He's going to win the best supporting character.
Right, well listen.
Shafter is what we'll do.
If head over to Patreon.
Or buy me a cup.
Yes.
If you don't want to hear the end of this story, fine. You could just stay where you are. But if you'd like to give the two of us €5 to split between the two of us.
That's €3 for me and €2 for Jason. Then you can hear what happens to Sean Quinn in Avengers 4, the Sean Quinnity Stones.
Yes, we'll see. Oh, for the first time ever, we'll see you behind a paywall yeah, look at us moving up in the world and such, becoming the new Brian and James fuck each other. We're a whole thing.
Good luck.
Shafter.